And we're here with Ty Anderson. Ty, what is up?
What's going on? It only took you like 2 years to get me on this thing.
I know, it did. It
That's
took me
my
a long
fault, though.
time. That is your fault. That is not my fault.
That's
I
true.
will not sit here and take the blame for something like that. That was you. You were on strike, if I remember right. You were on strike from Bruins beat, which is
I think
ridiculous.
I just said that. I don't know if it actually was like an actual strike. There's not many shows that I'll probably actually strike from. So I just it was one of those things where I was like, no, I don't want to do that. And then you'd ask me like, nah, maybe later. And then I was just like, no, I just disappear, wouldn't text back. So we have a reason now, though. Finally, right? We're entering my wheelhouse of discussion, so I feel like I had to come for this episode.
Yes, no, this is a big episode for you. This was it's a good time of year for you to get back into things and air your grievances about people who have now taken to Twitter. We'll dive right in. Have taken to Twitter to kind of say, hey, look, why the Bruins bringing back Rask? Because on Monday, Tuukka Rask was at Bruins practice as the e-bug, as the emergency backup goalie, but nevertheless, he was there taking reps with the team, Bruins apparel. It is 100% certain that he will be coming back. It just comes down to when and what the price will be. I would imagine it's not going to be much higher than about like 2 to 3 million. Most likely, it's going to be that wheelhouse, I would assume. But what people are really up in arms about, and we can get to the price and what you think the price will be for the deal. But what people are really up in arms about is how does he fit in? Why bring him back? And I would like you to explain how that all works for people, so it can be settled once and for all.
Yeah, I just think that do people think he's coming back at $7 million? Because he's not. Do people think he's coming back to be the starter for every single game? Because he's not. This is a scenario where it is a can't lose position for the Boston Bruins, where if you have the ability to maybe have 3 good goaltenders, why wouldn't you do that? Based on the hell you've been through, right? These last few years where you either lose defensemen or you lose goaltenders, just everything that can go wrong tends to go wrong for the Bruins down the stretch or in the playoffs. And if you can have a safety net where you're saying, okay, if we make this move, our number 3 goalie at the very worst is Tuukka Rask, or at the very best is Jeremy Swayman instead of Troy Grosneck or Kyle Kaiser. Why wouldn't you do that, right? And so I think there are a lot of things that factor in. Number one is he's a well above average goaltender, and if his hip surgery fixes whatever was going on with him, I mean, he should return to that level. And I think you look at the schedule down the stretch where the Bruins have 35 games in less than 70 days, I'm pretty sure, to end the season. You may very well need all 3 goaltenders between Ullmark, who has an injury history, between Swayman, who's inexperienced and isn't used to the 82-game grind of a regular season, and then Tuukka, who's going to be going from 0 to 60. If you can cover all of your bases and for cheap money, prorated money, why wouldn't you do that? This is the easiest decision out of all the decisions Don Sweeney has to make this year. This is probably the easiest one.
And it's funny because a lot of people are now saying, oh, this goes to show the Ullmark signing was a bad one. And granted, Ullmark has had his struggles to begin the season. He hasn't fully lived to 5 million per, obviously. But he's new, and I've said all along this whole time, I think at some point he's going to get hot. I think you're going to see him. The numbers have not lied the past couple of years. He's going to turn into someone who you can rely on. Not to say he isn't now, but that stealing games has not been Ullmark's thing thus far. Neither is Swayman, by the way, except for that game in Nashville. But the fact that I don't think when Ullmark was signed, I think they really thought Rask was probably done, at least with them. And now he's back. He made the comments after that he would be back during the summer. And now he looks good. He's ready to go. He'll take a huge discount. Why would you not take that? Because as you said, Ullmark's injury history, Swayman's a kid. You've Tuukka Rask right here, who is going to probably play when April comes around, when the playoffs come around. I would imagine Rask's games total will sit at around 20, maybe.
That's
maybe
probably being
20?
That's probably being overzealous. He's playing he's probably gonna be 12 to 13, maybe 14, 15. It all depends when he signs, obviously, and if the Olympic break factors into that in some fashion. But yeah, no, you're right. Why wouldn't you want that? And this is the part, unless you are driven by spite and you're saying, no, I don't want him because of what happened in 2013 or 2019 or 2006, whatever. It's like, okay, well, that's not a good way to manage a team. Like, you can't manage on spite. You need to put the best product out there. And I have a hard time believing that, the way this rotation works out again, whether it's Swayman, Ullmark, or Rask, if one of those guys is your third string goaltender, you're in a lot better position than pretty much every other team in the NHL. And it's a matter of finding out who is starting in the playoffs. Yeah, but you cross that bridge when you get there. Because I do think that ultimately I want to believe in this team, but I don't know if the Swayman Ullmark tandem, if it is the tandem, gets you to the playoffs, right? So that's the other part of it as well. But with Ullmark, I didn't hate the contract because, again, I mean, you look at the numbers last year, he had a better 5-on-5 save percentage than Andrei Vasilevsky and Marc-Andre Fleury, right? Like, he was directly above those guys for goaltenders. So I didn't hate that signing, and they needed a plan, right? Like, they were in on being a win now team. And when you're a win now team, you can't go into it with two rookie goaltenders. It's just impossible. Like, I get it, like the idea of, oh, you can save money by doing it. But if they were not ready, that sinks you faster than a bad defense and faster than not having great center depth. Bad goaltending will sink you faster than anything in the world. So I didn't hate the contract at the time.
And I think also the other thing at the time was, like, as you said, they needed a plan, and there weren't a lot of other plans out there. Like, I think a lot of people, and myself included, kind of said at the time, hey, why not just, like, maybe get like a Halak type, to just hold their own in net. And I think that's fair. But looking back, I don't know if there was that person. I mean, because Halak, as much as the soft goals kind of piled up as his time went on here, he still held his own. Like, he still was a big reason they got to the Cup in 2019 because he helped Rask get real rest. But Ullmark, like, is a starter, I think, in this league for sure, and he's getting paid like it. And I'm not ready to completely throw in the towel on it. I don't love the money. I still think it was a little too much. Just given, you have Swayman and maybe Rask comes back, but who knows? Maybe if Ullmark doesn't come, chance happens and Rask isn't able to come back, and you're left with Swayman and Vladar, which that's the other thing, is the Vladar situation where, like, he looks great up in Calgary, but it's like that's partially because the defense in front of him is really good. And who's to say they're absurd? And who's to say he would have had the same success here? So it's kind of a weird situation. The other thing that I think some people are hung up on, and TJ Bean wrote about this in NBC Sports Boston on Monday, was that you don't want Swayman to go to Providence. To which I would say, why?
Yeah,
He's
why
a
not?
kid. He's a kid. He didn't even have much time in Providence last season. All he just needs is reps.
And not to throw DJ in this boat because I know him and I know he's not like this, but a lot of people suddenly think a 918 is untouchable when Rask was posting 920, 922, and everyone thought it wasn't good enough. Now all of a sudden 918 save percentage is untouchable. You can't send that to the minors. It's just funny how that kind of works to me. Like what do you mean? Like, there's still a lot of things that Swayman has to work on or can work on to be a better goaltender. And yeah, to your point, he didn't play a lot in Providence last year. The idea that this is going to ruin him, I think, is such hyperbole that it borders on insane, because you really can't say, oh, it's going to ruin it. I mean, he's been a pro hockey player for less than a calendar year. What do you mean this is going to ruin him? He's not 27 going back to the minors. He's 23 years old. And I think that patience is never a bad thing with a goaltender. I mean, think about Tuukka, right? Like, Tuukka got thrown into the fire in 2007, 2008 as a 20-year-old. He had some good games and some ugly games. He went down to Providence for a whole year, right? He came up for one game. It was a shutout, I believe, against the Rangers. I think 32, 31 save shutout against the Rangers.
That's wild that you just pick that out of midair.
I was there. I remember. I think Mark Savard scored the game-winning goal. So that's how weird my brain is. But they win that game 1-0, and then you know what happens? He goes right back to the minors, and he's there for the rest of the season. It didn't hurt him. He still went on to become the all-time winningest goaltender in Bruins history, and it won a Vezina, has been to 2 Stanley Cup Finals. Like, patience is never a bad thing, and I think that the idea that you can't send Swayman back to the minors because of a 918 is just it's very bizarre to me, I guess.
And also the other thing with Rask is that in 2009, 2010 he was the starter, and then he lost the job in 2010, 11, and he didn't also have the job in 11, 12. That talk about mentally, you lose the starting job to an old kind of journeyman goaltender. Like, and he was fine. Like, again, I think you're right. The patience thing matters. It is okay that Swayman goes down to Providence. I would love to see him up in Boston. I think most people in an ideal world would like Rask Swayman as the tandem, but that's not what the tandem is. It's Rask Ullmark, and you have the option to send Swayman to Providence without having to go through waivers. So fine. What is wrong with that? So
Yeah.
the Rask thing, I think, is fine. Like, again, I don't know what the price is going to be. What do you think? What do you think the price is going to be?
I think prorated probably around 2.5 million makes the most sense because we don't know how the hip is going to react. I mean, everyone's saying the right things. The reports have been good out of Rask camp and how it's coming along. The timeline hasn't changed much. If anything, maybe it's gone up a week or two, which is again encouraging. But you just don't know, right? 34 years old, a lot of miles on him, really. And he's, I mean, this would be his 15th year in the NHL. I mean, so he's been a pro for a while now. And so I think that makes the most sense. Ultimately, again, the cap situation too, he's made it clear that he's going to work with the Bruins to find the right number. It's kind of similar to Joe Thornton with the Sharks, where it's like, whatever you got left, like we'll find the number that works. I feel like it's very comparable to that. So that makes sense. And one more thing with Allmark before we move on out of the Allmark discussion. I think that it's important to remember with Allmark that when weighing the starts against one another, Allmark's got the heavier competition. I really
Yes,
do
I've
believe
said
that.
this. Yes,
The
100%.
the road game in Toronto, it's a tough spot. Uh, Road game against Florida when they were undefeated, tough spot. He played well against Florida at home. That Saturday night game against Florida. He also got the Oilers as well. Like he's drawn like the high powered offenses where I think Swayman has gotten a bit of a softer landing here, a little, but just a touch lighter. Yeah, I would just say that that's one thing to note with Allmark struggles is if we're weighing the goals against and the numbers, quality of competition I think does matter in that respect.
100%, 100%. Because I think that has been a legitimate thing, and I don't know if that's intentional or not. Might be, but I do wonder if the roles were reversed, what the numbers would be if Omar had Swayman's slate of games. His numbers, I would imagine, would be much better. So that is something to also consider. Okay, speaking of big things, Jake DeBrusk. This time last week, I believe it was announced or it was reported that this
Yep.
time last week for when we're recording, because people will listen to this Tuesday or whenever. But a week ago, Monday, it was reported that Jake DeBrusk requested a trade. People booed him the next night. But now he had to play for a bit. He scored a goal, which was huge. He's been all right. You know, he's been kind of the same streaky player-ish at times. He needs a change of scenery for sure. But now that the Bruins have guys coming back, Marchand off suspension, you can call it from Providence now pretty much. Um, it's kind of time for the trade, and we're just kind of waiting for when that's going to hit. What teams excite you? What teams that he could go to are you going to get the most from? And should they package him?
Well, I don't think that they want to package him. I think they want to sort of make this trade, get something to help them now, and then make another trade at the deadline for whatever is ailing them at that point in the season. I don't think they want to make their move now. So I think the DeBrusk trade, I believe, will be a separate package. So trying to kind of whittle down, like, okay, who makes sense for them? Like, what's a need? The obvious one that everyone keeps talking about is Chicago, right? With Dylan Strome, 1-for-1, DeBrusk for Strome. It fits a lot of needs for both teams. Bruins get a center, um, and the Blackhawks get a winger that they probably need looking at their offense. So that would
They need
make
a
the
few
most
things.
sense. Personally, I don't hate it. I don't love it either, though. Like it's kind of one of those moves where I feel like everything would kind of be the same. Um, he's not a. I shouldn't say Strom was like a bad investment, but I just the concussion history kind of concerns me a little bit with him. I'm a little apprehensive about that kind of trade. I look at Calgary as well. Like there's a potential here for a move that I don't know how legit it is really. I mean, this is me spitballing, but if you could do a Monahan for DeBrusk swap where the Flames clear out some salary because they got to re-sign Mangiapane, Gaudreau, and Kachuk this offseason. So to get his contract off the books would be a big get. But also, I mean, Monahan had success in the past. He had an 82-point season a couple of years back with the Flames, but he's now in the third line, right? Like he could slide into Boston, be in your second line with Taylor Hall, and it's like you might be cooking with something there, So that's something that I think would excite me. I mean, I look at those two teams as just kind of natural fits for him. But ultimately, I would move him out west. If I'm the Bruins, I'm not really entertaining trades in the East. I think out west is where you can get the most bang for your buck. Trading him to Western Canada or to a team in the Pacific somewhere.
Yes, I also think that's good for DeBrusk too. I think he would probably ideally want to be in Western Canada, and I think because I think a lot of people think this, and I remember Connor was saying this as well. We were both saying this last year around the deadline. Wherever he goes, he's going to put up goals, right? Like he's just going to find a way to score 25 or 30 goals a season, and we're going to hear about it all the time. We get to tweet about it and all that stuff. But the Monahan thing excites me because you get a legit second or third line center with Monahan. And if you put him with the correct line mates in a good situation, that's you got something there. Because again, then you can have that third line of potentially Holla, Coyle, and Smith. Well, no, actually. No, because you probably have to keep Smith.
You could have Holla, Coyle, and Foligno or Smith, basically. Whatever, however you want to, work it out. I mean, that's what you could do. I mean, what gets me excited about that kind of trade is I love it because, Monahan's due some money, right? But he's not due money for the next 8 years, right? You're taking on the final 2 years of his current contract, which if you're the Bruins, you can probably afford to make that gamble right now because you have McAvoy signed. And I think Pasternak's up next, obviously. But like you have this little window here where you can take on a contract that's $6.5 million and it's not the end of the world, just based on what you've done to this point. So that's another reason for it. You're not buying in on 5 years, that's $6.5 million. You're buying in on 2 years of it. It's much more palatable, I think, if you're the Bruins.
And also, this team does not have a lot to trade away. So again, if you can find a way to swing DeBrusk, I feel like it would take one more thing though to get Monahan. I feel like it couldn't. Could it really just be a 1-for-1 swap? I feel like it would have to be like DeBrusk a prospect, or DeBrusk and a prospect for Monahan.
It all depends too on what Calgary is sort of dealing with in terms of their situation. Like, do they believe that Dylan Dubé could be a third line center? Like that's his natural position. He's played the wing for a large chunk of his Calgary career. He started the preseason, I believe, at center and then moved back to left wing. But like, do they believe in him being that guy? Because if they do, you're okay with that because you got to get that contract out of the way. You got to get that off the books to keep the core of your team together. And I think Monahan has proven, or not proven, but he's not really part of that new core, right? Like that new core is what it is with Kachuk, Mangiapane, and Lindholm and Hannafin. Like, so he might be part of that, like he may have fallen out of frame, similar to how DeBrusk has fallen out of frame in Boston. So for them, it may be just like getting rid of that contract. And you talk to Flames fans and they're pretty eager to get rid of that contract. So it may not take a sweetener, honestly, just given Calgary's cap situation.
That's true. And the idea of the cap and kind of shedding that money would be like getting another prospect or something in return. And the other thing is, if they can do that, right? If you can do DeBrusk for Monahan, that you get a center. You don't need to add one at the deadline. You can focus on potentially adding a defenseman at the deadline. That's that should be your number one priority. I also think that you could potentially, if this all worked out, you would get Rask back. You'd be upgrading your net, getting a Sean Monahan in a center. You're definitely upgrading down the middle, and your offense is much better. And if you go out and get a D at the deadline or whatever, you upgrade on D. That's a much better team. Like that's a contender. Right now, I would say the Bruins are a middle of the pack team. If you do that, right, Monahan, Rask, and a defenseman, I don't have a name off the top of my head, apologies, but you do a defenseman, you're a better team. I don't know about saying Stanley Cup contender, but you are much better off.
Giordano? You want to swing for the fences and go Giordano?
It's not a terrible idea. I don't hate that. I mean, your left side could use that.
Could use something.
Yeah. I mean, because you can. I mean, if Zaboral, which we still have not heard the deal with Zaboral, correct? There's been
Yeah, there's
nothing
been
on
no
Zaboral
update
yet.
out of Bruins
No, which is
camp. It seems like.
odd.
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious. It's not a great injury. I mean, it didn't look it anyways, unless it's just a
No,
really bad swelling kind of injury, which would be surprising to be honest. But yeah, do we want to unload the idea that we were discussing in the group chat last night? Do we want to talk about that idea, or do you want to save that? What do you want to do?
you can let it fire because it was your idea.
Yeah,
It was
I,
your
I
idea.
mean,
I wasn't gonna
listen,
bring it up because I didn't know if you wanted to like do it on your thing, but you can
no,
absolutely
no,
lay it out
we
here
can
because I'd
say it
love it.
wherever. We can say it wherever, because it's gonna get out there eventually.
It's true.
All right, so Vegas is going to have Jack Eichel coming back soon, yeah, or not soon, but in theory, sometime this season.
He's got to come
When
back
that
at some point.
happens, they have to clear over $10 million in cap space. If you're the Bruins, why aren't you jumping on some sort of package? This is independent of DeBrusk, I would imagine, just because of the whole money aspect. Why aren't you jumping on like getting William Karlsson and Braden McNabb or William Karlsson and Riley Smith, like some sort of combo like that, where all of a sudden now you've stacked the deck and you've probably done it for pennies on the dollar because Vegas has to get rid of these guys. They can't keep them. They're over the cap. They have to get rid of them. I mean, think about when they traded Nate Schmidt, right? That return wasn't anything substantial, despite Schmidt being one of their best defensemen, right? Like
Was that a second or a third?
I
It
think it was
was
a third.
nothing.
I want to say
It was
it
a
wasn't even a
third.
second. Like I want to say it was a third. I might be mistaken on that, but like the whole league knows they got to move these guys, right? So it could be a potential bidding war. But if you could get Carlson and McNabb or Carlson and Smith or Smith and McNabb, like whatever way you want to work it out, like you can substantially upgrade your team at a relatively fair price, you would imagine. So that's something that could be a deadline move for them as well.
Yeah. And again, like I think this Bruins team, again, I mean, I haven't seen enough to in other situations, if you took the way the Bruins are, you would say, I don't know if you really want to go all in, right? You do want to kind of build a little bit for the future, keep the first round picks, which I don't think you have to give in any of these deals we've mentioned, by the way. I don't think you're giving up your first in any of them. Hurdle would be the only one that was close.
Yeah.
But you look at Marchand and McAvoy and Pasternak. You don't know how much. I don't want to mention this, but you don't know how much longer you're gonna have Pasternak for because that deal, whether you re-sign him or not, which is something we can completely get to another day, right? But you're probably gonna have Rask back. Go for it.
Go for it.
it. You
Go for
absolutely
it.
go for it because
The
Marchand's
future's
in
going to
this.
suck. Just embrace the suck of the future and try to make
Yes,
today as best you can.
that could be on a T-shirt. I think that is on some T-shirts.
What, embrace the suck?
Embrace the suck. That is the thing.
Probably gets you kicked out of some places.
but I do think though that go all in. Like, and my whole thing goes back to Marchand. Like I think Marchand is a potentially top 5 player in the league. When you have one of those guys on your team, you don't waste those years.
Mm-hmm.
You go for it. And I think with this crew, do it. Like I think there are, as you said, there are situations around the league you can pick from. The DeBrusk thing might be a blessing in disguise because you might upgrade your team in an area where you need to upgrade, as you mentioned, to center. That you might not have been able to do otherwise. Maybe you don't trade DeBrusk if he doesn't ask for a trade. So lots of interesting scenarios with trading, but let's discuss the guys who the Bruins do have. By the way, I love the idea of William Karlsson on the Bruins.
Wild
Second
Bill,
line
baby.
center.
Bring him in.
Wild Bill with Taylor Hall on his left and maybe Craig Smith on his right. Are you kidding me? Like, hell yes.
It's a good line.
You think they can upgrade on the right side on D? You think they need to? I mean, I think they do, but do you think they're able to?
Yeah, I those are deals that you can kind of make on deadline day because you have teams that are sitting there going, "Oh God, we're going to keep this 30-year-old UFA to be. Why are we doing this?" And then the price will come down. Like you can get like a Nick Holden type, right, for a third round pick, a fourth round pick, and I think that was key with the Vladar trade, right? Is recouping that third round pick for this year. That they traded it for the Mike Riley trade and they get a new third round pick basically from Calgary to replace it. So that adds to your trade capital, your trade arsenal, whatever you want to call it. So you can make a move there. So yeah, I think a third pairing right shot D shouldn't be hard to find on the trade market. But you got to try to beat other teams to the punch, right? And so that's sort of the challenge where you don't want someone else setting the market for you, where some stupid team comes in and they throw a second round pick for a third pairing guy. Now the whole market's out of whack. So this is something that I think the Bruins need to get a little bit better at, is setting the market. It seems like they're often chasing prices that have been established by Tampa or Pittsburgh before them, or like you know what I mean. Like they're always making the move after someone else made it. So I think that's a challenge within itself. So we'll see if they can do that. But I think that's these are all sort of things that we're talking about. You mentioning going in, me mentioning setting the prices. Like these are all things that I think the Bruins by now should have realized that half measures aren't really working. Time, you don't have a ton of it on your side. So make the big splash, right? Swing for the fences, get the stop the top guy available and go from there. So I just think that the missteps of the past, especially with Sweeney and Neely, kind of I think managing for their jobs to a certain degree, will make this team more desperate and more hungry on the trade market this time around.
And maybe I'm wrong about this, but wasn't the Rick Nash trade kind of like that? Like, wasn't Nash, if I remember correctly, he was one of the bigger fish at the time, and it just didn't work. He had concussions, and you gave up, it was what was a first, Lindgren, who's now doing great for the Rangers, great D
Yep.
partner for Adam Fox, and I forget what else was in that
Spooner
deal.
and
Spooner.
Bolesky at
Yep.
50% retained, I believe. So
Yes.
yeah, they made a slew of trades around that time. It's kind of hard to keep up because they also acquired Holden in a separate trade involving a third round pick and Robbie O'Gara. So it almost felt like one big trade, but it wasn't. No, like they've done it, right? Like they have, but even then Nash came with some question marks, some concerns. But they were in on Mark Stone, right? The following year didn't really pan
Yep.
out. Paul Mary is another guy that they were in on for what felt like years, and he goes to Islanders and plays a massive role in bouncing you from the playoffs. So, they were in on McDonough. McDonough goes to the Lightning instead and plays a big factor in eliminating you as well. So, I think that's an area where I'm talking about. Blake Coleman, another one where it's like, they get beat to the punch on certain guys, and I would really hate it if, say, they have a need here, right? And the Lightning jump on it because points out or Stamkos gets injured again, whatever the case may be, and they come in and swoop a second line center or a third line center that you could really use. So that's an area that I want to see the Bruins set the market and make that sort of desperation trade, if you will.
I was recording Marina last week. Something broke. It wasn't the DeBrusk thing. Oh, it was the Marchand suspension. The
Yeah.
Marchand suspension broke midway through, so that was fun. Speaking of the Marchand suspension, he is back. He is going to be back, and his first game, of course, is against Vancouver on Wednesday. But so the big question with Marchand returning is Taylor Hall looked pretty damn good with David Pastrnak and Patrice Bergeron. So a lot of people are saying, hey, why not just keep that together? Seemed to work for the most part. Marchand's great, kind of a line driver. You can put him with Coyle and Smith and kind of see how that works. And I don't like that. I don't like that at all. And I'll tell you why. Because, and I know you believe the same thing I do on this, I think the right move is you always keep Marchand and Bergeron together. You put Smith with them, and you move Hall. You move Pastrnak down with Hall and Coyle. I think that's the move. I think you get the most out of that. What are the chances they do this though? Because I feel like it's very slim that they actually make that kind of move.
Yeah, I mean, it feels slim, right? Because Cassidy has rarely, if ever, had any sort of appetite for breaking up that first line. But it does make sense, right? Because I do think that Bergeron and Marchand have proven they can play with just about anybody. I think some of the only players who didn't work out with them are Brett Connolly, the late Jimmy Hayes, and I want to say there was one other guy who didn't really blend the way that it should have blended. But you can really put.
Was Vetrano up there?
He may have
No,
been. He may have been.
I don't know.
But for the most part, they fit with anybody. And you go back to last year before they acquired Taylor Hall. Craig Smith was phenomenal with them. I thought that's really what got him going as a Bruin, got him on the board, momentum, confidence, all of that. So that's proven that can happen. So if you want to keep this Hall connection together, right? Like you do it with Pastrnak and with Coyle as their center, because I do think that's the line that can bring the best out of all three guys. The one thing I'd worry about though is can Coyle and Hall do the dirty work that Bergeron and Marchand do to get Pastrnak those great setups there where he's all alone, right between the circles, and can fire it, whatever the case may be. So that's a concern there. But yeah, the idea of ever breaking up Bergeron and Marchand, I do this thing where people bring it up and I automatically tune out because I'm like, no, that's not happening. Like they have never done that. They never will. Like, so it feels very silly to think about it. But breaking Pastrnak away from them, that we've seen before, right? We've seen Krejci with Pastrnak before. So there's at least some sort of bit of a precedent there that they've done it before. So I could see it happening. I mean, I don't think it will, but it is a combination that intrigues me because I do think that ultimately it spreads out the scoring a bit more evenly, but also allows you to get a deeper look at if Hall and Pastrnak have some sort of chemistry going on.
And also, I think Pastrnak and Hall being on the same line, those are two guys that you would typically kind of game plan for-ish. You're making sure to cover them. Pastrnak draws a lot of attention, leaves Hall open, leaves him more space to use his speed, which we saw a ton of in the past 3 games. I mean, how many times in the past 3 games did Hall take it himself, enter the zone on his own, and sort of start to set something up? You do that with Coyle. I mean, Smith is great with, Coyle and Hall, but I don't think Smith draws the attention that David Pastrnak does and doesn't give Hall that kind of space. So to me, I'm in favor of doing that. Do I think they will? Probably not off the start. You might see it like mid-game just for because that's typically what they do. They do it for like 40 minutes in the middle of a game. But I don't know. So I would like them to do it. Again, like I've always said, I mean, because their big issue for a while now has been you shut down that first line, there's no scoring after it. Why not make it so you have 2 legit lines? I mean, is Hall, Coyle, Pastrnak a potential first line? Probably not, just because of Coyle and him being a fringe second line center, but that's pretty damn good. Yeah. That's pretty damn good. So I don't see like the huge issue with that.
The other part of it too is I think I bought in on it when I shouldn't say bought in it totally, but I came around to the idea where there was that play in I believe it was the 3rd period of Saturday's game where Pastrnak makes that flip pass through the neutral zone, and Taylor Hall gets it and drives right to the net, gets a great scoring chance. And it's like, wow, these guys are starting to get on the same page here. Like this might be the start of something. So for that reason, I am interested in seeing it, but I don't think we're gonna. But I mean, game against Vancouver may not be the worst time to try it if you're gonna try it at all. A game against a bad team might be when you want to give that a look, and if it doesn't work after a period, you go back to the business as usual.
See, I would want to see a whole game. I would. Especially against Vancouver.
Listen, I would as well, but there's a lot of things I want to see this coaching staff doesn't do. Like they're not the most patient group for a number of reasons, but I think that's something that that could help them ultimately long term. But long term, again, I mean, goes back to a trade. I want to see Coyle and Hall together because I liked that combination a lot. So I want to see more of that, but that can't happen until the Bruins add another center, preferably on that second line.
And you mentioned the patience thing. That's part of why Jake DeBrusk is on his way out the door. Not a lot of patience with that. When do you think that happens?
When?
Yeah, I mean, obviously when Sweden finds the deal, but
I would say 3 weeks because I do think there's an element of trying to get the best trade, not the first trade that's offered to you. And so I think that they got to drum up a little bit of a bidding war here. Like they gotta up the ante with some teams. Say, okay, that's great, but so-and-so's offering me this. What can you do? If you can create some sort of bidding war, especially potentially within that division with Calgary and Edmonton and Vancouver. I mean, Vancouver is likely rebuilding, but you know what I mean? Like, if you can say, hey, well, this same team that you're chasing or vice versa also wants him, you can maximize your return because this is a necessary part of Don Sweeney's job, something that I think the front office hasn't been particularly great at under his leadership is like they never seem to trade guys for the proper return versus what they could have gotten, say, 2 years prior. But if you can have a bidding war, right, 12 teams reportedly interested in him, you got to get something good. And I think if you take the first trade that's offered to you, I think you're a sucker. And I think DeBrusk has also held up his end of the bargain here where he's playing well, right? Like he's not playing great, but he's passing, right? He looks better than he has, I think, for large stretches this season. So he knows the best way to get out of town is by playing well. And I think the Bruins know that if he plays well, they can get a better return. So everyone wins in that scenario.
Everybody wins. Hopefully that's what ends up happening. Ty, before you go, what can the people look forward to over at 98.5, and what should they know about Sports Hub Underground?
Oh, it's just a podcast with two idiots, myself and Matt, just having some fun with it and totally rebranding what we used to do. We hated that Sidelines name so much. We really did. And so this one is a little bit different, a little bit, I don't want to say less prepared because it's a bad way of saying it, but like it's more, we just shoot from the hip and we talk about, whatever we want to talk about. We don't feel boxed into a certain subject or whatnot. So we like that. And on the website, we'll have some coverage of this upcoming road trip. Obviously following the DeBrusk angle, see what's happening there, the Tuukka angle, see what's happening there. But I think right now we're getting into that sort of nitty gritty of the season where we're trying to keep pace in it with everything, but also not burn out because no one wants bad coverage in January and February. So a little bit of a balancing act, I suppose.
Well, you've been doing a great job. A lot of stuff over at 98.5, the Sports Hub. Make sure to go do that. And when can people look forward to Sports Hub Underground? What day does that drop?
We record on Wednesdays and episodes drop Thursday. However, Matt is going on vacation, so I think we might be recording earlier. So this might be happening. So we'll keep your eyes peeled to my Twitter, sifting through the arguments to find the good stuff.
No, they will. People make sure to go listen to that when it drops. Anyways, for CLNS Media, I'm Evan Marinofsky. You Bruins listeners, have a great rest of your week.